Many people believe that raising the minimum wage is a trade-off between helping the poor and harming businesses. Is this true? Let's look at just facts. Politicians, commentators, and journalists often say that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would lift almost 1 million people out of poverty. That stylized statistic is rooted in a recent analysis by the Congressional Budget Office. It estimated that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would reduce the number of people living below the poverty line by 0.9 million. Contrary to the phrase lifting people out of poverty, this does not necessarily involve a dramatic change in their finances. It only means they will receive at least a little more than the official federal poverty thresholds. For example, a single parent with 2 children and a yearly income of $20,000 would be lifted out of poverty if their reported cash income rose above $20,852, the federal poverty threshold for this family structure. That slight bump in income is typical of what the law would accomplish. This is because raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would increase real family income of families under the poverty line by an average of $589 per year. How can their income rise by only $589 per year, given that a full-time worker who gets a raise from $7.25 to $15 an hour will receive an extra $15,500 in wages per year? One of the main reasons is that the vast bulk of people in poverty work very little, or not at all. In fact, only 27% of adults in poverty during 2018 were in the labor force for at least half the year. This includes part-time workers and those who were simply looking for work. Consequently, CBO estimates that increasing the minimum wage to $15 per hour would give 81% of the resultant wage increases to families who were already above the poverty line. Moreover, an extra $589 per year is merely 1% of the average total income of households in poverty. This is because their real incomes are several times greater than commonly reported. The official poverty and income statistics widely used by governments and media outlets exclude a vast array of goods and services that poor people receive from governments and charities. Thus, they ignore the reality that every year, food stamp beneficiaries receive an average of about $3,000 per household in food stamps. Medicare beneficiaries receive an average of about $8,000 per person in health benefits. Section 8 voucher beneficiaries receive an average of about $9,000 per household in rental assistance, and Head Start beneficiaries receive an average of about $11,000 per child in child care and preschool benefits. Plus, other government programs provide utility assistance, college grants, school lunch, school breakfast, community health centers, family planning services, prescription drugs, job training, legal services, cell phone service, and internet service. Also, U.S. citizens donate about $50 billion each year to charities that provide direct services to people in need, an average of $1,471 for every person reportedly below the poverty line. Another major source of income to the poor that is left out of common statistics is income that they simply don't report. For example, a 2015 paper in the Journal of Economic Perspectives found that more than half of welfare dollars were unreported in several major surveys that the government uses to determine poverty rates. In 2019, the IRS estimated that 55% of all income not reported to the IRS by third parties, like employers, is never reported to the IRS by the people who receive the money. In 2013, the chief actuary of the U.S. Social Security Administration estimated that 3.9 million illegal immigrants worked in the underground economy during 2010. And there are also benefits that the government forces the private sector to give to the poor. For example, federal law requires most hospitals with emergency departments to provide an examination and stabilizing treatment for anyone who comes to such a facility and requests care for an emergency medical condition or childbirth, regardless of their ability to pay and immigration status. All told, The poorest 20% of U.S. households consumed an average of $57,049 of goods and services in 2010, while reporting only $11,034 in pre-tax cash income. That last figure is used to determine the official poverty rate, but the first figure represents their total income. Getting back to the minimum wage, $589 amounts to only 1% of that income. For perspective, $589 is about half of what households who receive food stamps spend per year on average for sweetened drinks, desserts, and candy. This is not nearly enough to truly lift anyone out of poverty. In comparison to the 0.9 million people who would be lifted out of poverty by doubling the minimum wage, solid economic growth did this for 4.2 million people in 2019. Another reason why the average income increase from doubling the minimum wage is so low is that CBO estimates the law would destroy 1.4 million jobs. This is because when the cost of employing low-wage workers goes up, some employers will replace them with machinery, technology, and higher-wage workers. This is basic economics. When the prices of goods and services rise, like the services provided by low-wage workers, people tend to purchase less of them. CBO notes that there are some limited circumstances where increasing the minimum wage could boost employment. But such situations are the exception, not the rule. The CBO also finds that young, less educated people would account for a disproportionate share of those reductions in employment. In the words of PhD economists Don Boudreau and Walter Williams, this disparate impact on young and less educated people makes the long-term consequences of the minimum wage even more dire. This is because the climb to higher wages begins for most workers during their teenage years with entry-level jobs. As such, raising the minimum wage saws off the bottom rungs of the economic ladder and leaves inexperienced workers unskilled and unemployed for the indefinite future. Beyond the direct impacts on poor and young people, the CBO estimates that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would increase the cost to employers of producing goods and services, and this would increase consumer prices, thus leading consumers to purchase fewer goods and services and reducing employment of workers at all wage levels. Due mainly to such job losses, CBO finds that raising the minimum wage would slightly reduce real GDP, or the size of the nation's economy. Progressives claim that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would reduce dependence on welfare and save taxpayers money. However, the same CBO analysis estimates that this law would cause spending on most social programs to rise and increase the cumulative budget deficit by $54 billion. This is because raising the minimum wage would increase the prices of goods and services purchased by social programs and make more people jobless. These individuals will become even more dependent on government, and the national debt will rise, creating a greater burden on taxpayers. CBO also estimates that raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour would raise prices for goods or services whose production required a larger than average share of low-wage work, such as food prepared in restaurants. Other prices would rise as well, but to a lesser extent. Simply put, these higher prices mean higher inflation, and that means people will get less goods and services for their money. In summary, minimum wage laws force employers to pay certain employees more than the market rate for their services. The immediate effects of this are obvious. These workers will receive more wages. However, the prolific economist William A. McEachern warns that it is a mistake to only consider the immediate effects of public policies and ignore the secondary effects, or the unintended consequences of them. He then emphasizes, economic actions have secondary effects that often turn out to be more important than the primary effects. Secondary effects may develop more slowly and may not be immediately obvious, but good economic analysis tries to anticipate them and take them into account. By estimating both primary and secondary effects while noting there is room for uncertainty, the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 per hour would raise the total income of households below the poverty line by an average of $589, or roughly 1%. Lift the income of about 0.9 million people above federal poverty thresholds, or about 1/5 of the 4.2 million people whose incomes rose above those thresholds in 2019. Destroy about 1.4 million jobs with a disparate impact on young, less educated people. Slightly reduce the health of the overall economy. Increase inflation, especially for goods and services produced by low-income workers. Increase the national debt by about $54 billion, plus another $16 billion in added interest costs spurred by inflation. And place greater burdens on taxpayers. By failing to report the harms of raising the minimum wage while exaggerating its benefit with phrases like lifting people out of poverty, media outlets are leading voters and policymakers to make uninformed decisions that could harm a lot of people. I'm Amanda Reed-Sheik, here with Just Facts. For thorough documentation of every fact in this video and more facts about this issue, read the article Maximum Facts About the Minimum Wage at justfactsdaily.com.